prices go up. But check out World War I. All of a sudden, you know, we inflate as usual, but this time money does not go back to its normal value. Prices start to skyrocket after the Great Depression. Notice the difference between the left and the right-hand side of the graphs. There has to be something that made that happen, right? Something that caused this change. And the change was the creation of what they call the Federal Reserve. That's Ben Bernanke. This, by the way, has not been photoshopped or retouched in any way. That's an actual picture of Ben Bernanke. Now, Ben Bernanke and the Federal Reserve Board are called the economic czars of America. Why is that? Because they set interest rates in this country. And by setting interest rates, they control the direction of the stock market. You know, if interest rates go high, then savings and keeping your money in a bank and savings accounts looks real good. And money flows out of the stock market into the banks. But if they want the stock market to go up, like it's done in recent years, then they make interest rates very low. Now, how did the Federal Reserve get started? Most people would say, I don't know, some act of our government, right? Yeah, it was the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. The man who introduced the legislation was Senator Nelson Aldrich. Now, most people today haven't heard of Senator Aldrich, but a lot of your parents remember this man, Nelson Rockefeller. He was President of the United States under Gerald Ford. He was long governor of New York. He was a billionaire, one of the most powerful men of the world. His full name was Nelson Aldrich Rockefeller. It was his name for his grandfather, Nelson Aldrich, whose daughter married John D. Rockefeller, Jr., and whose son, Winthrop Aldrich, headed up the Rockefeller's Chase Bank. You see, when he spoke on Capitol Hill in the Senate, people knew he was talking for the Rockefellers and their friends. But here's what we really need to know. When he brought forward this legislation that ultimately became the Federal Reserve Act, he didn't write one word of it. It was all created at a secret meeting on Jekyll Island off the coast of Georgia by private bankers, a 9-day secret meeting. Now, Jekyll Island's open to the public today, but at that time it was the private retreat of the Morgans and the Rockefellers and the Vanderbilts and the Astors. Now, some people would say, ah, come on, Mr. Perloff, some kooky conspiracy theory. No, it's not. You can go to Jekyll Island today and stay at the Jekyll Island Club Hotel, and they will show you what they call the Federal Reserve Room. That's the room where they actually planned the Federal Reserve Bank. The first man to report on the Jekyll Island secret meeting was B.C. Forbes, the founder of Forbes magazine. And one of the men at the meeting described it in his memoirs. That was Frank Vanderlip. You've all heard of Citibank, right? It used to be called the National City Bank, and it was a nasty bank. But he was its president, and here's what he wrote in his memoirs 25 years later. That there was an occasion, this is close to 1910, when I was as secretive, indeed as furtive as any conspirator. I do not feel it's any exaggeration to speak of our secret expedition to Jekyll Island as the occasion of the actual conception of the Federal Reserve System. We were told to leave our last names behind us. We were told further that we should avoid dining together on the night of our departure. We were instructed to come one at a time and as unobtrusively, secretly as possible to the terminal of the New Jersey Little of the Hudson, where Senator Aldrich's private car would be in readiness attached to the rear end of the train to the south. Once aboard the private car, we began to observe the taboo that had been fixed on last names. Discovery we knew simply must not happen. If it would be discovered that our particular group had got together and written a banking bill, that bill would have no chance whatever of passage by Congress. Now, who was at the meeting? Well, believe it or not, the men at this meeting represented 25% of all the wealth in the world at that time. The world's 3 biggest banking houses were represented there. Representing the House of Rockefeller was Frank Vanderlip and Senator Aldrich. And representing the House of J.P. Morgan, left to right, Benjamin Strong, head of J.P. Morgan's Bankers Trust Company. Henry Davison, senior partner at J.P. Morgan and Company. And Charles Norton, head of Morgan's First National Bank of New York. But the most important man at the meeting, the man who ran the meeting, was a man representing the European Rothschild interest, Paul Warburg. Now, most people today haven't heard of Paul Warburg, but if you've ever seen the musical Annie or maybe the old comic strip called Little Orphan Annie, you might know that Annie had this rich benefactor, the richest man in the world, Daddy Warbucks. And Daddy Warbucks was just a caricature of Paul Warburg. The artist simply took the name Warburg and changed it to Warbucks. I don't think Daddy Warbucks is a very good representation of Paul Warburg. If you're looking for a fictional character that stood for him better, I think this man did a better job. Now, but who was Paul Warburg? Paul Warburg was a German banker, and in Europe, he had set up central banks working with the Rothschilds, and they greatly profited from these central banks. And in 1902, the Rothschilds sent Warburg to America with instructions to establish a similar bank in America. As soon as he got here, he got a job with Kuhn Loeb and Company, which was the Rothschild banking satellite in New York City. And he quickly formed an alliance with the two most powerful men in America, John D. Rockefeller and J.P. Morgan. This alliance was nothing new because the Rothschilds had provided the money, the original money, to start Rockefeller's Standard Oil fortune. They had also bailed out J.P. Morgan when his firm got in trouble in the 19th century. Now in 1907, J.P. Morgan, he controlled a lot of newspapers. He started a phony rumor about the insolvency, the troubles of some rival banks. And this led to runs on these banks. If you've ever seen that movie, It's a Wonderful Life, it's an example of a run on the bank. You know, banks make profits by loaning out money that's on deposit. But if there's a panic and all the depositors want their money at the same time, the bank can collapse, and that's what happened to these rival banks. Now after that, Morgan's newspapers and John D. Rockefeller's newspapers and Senator Aldrich in Congress began screaming, America must have a central bank, so we'll have no more of these catastrophes. But why do you think they wanted a central bank? Well, who do you suppose that President Woodrow Wilson appoints as vice chairman of the Federal Reserve? Well, he will set America's interest rates. Paul Warburg. Who gets appointed head of the New York Federal Reserve, the system's nucleus? Benjamin Strong. See, the very guys who sat at Jekyll Island in secret and planned this bank are now running the bank. The foxes are running the hen house. But why do they want this central bank? Well, Paul Warburg, when he was at Kuhn Loeb and Company, his salary was $500,000 a year. That was an amazing, amazing amount of money back then. That's like more than $10 million a year in today's dollars. He gave that up for a position on the Federal Reserve Board that only paid $12,000. Now, why do you think that was? Because he was a great patriot? The guy just got here from Germany. He got it. He got that position because he said, why should I make a measly, piddling, diddling $500,000 a year at Kuhn Loeb when I can make countless millions from myself and my friends in high finance by sitting on the Federal Reserve Board and setting interest rates and controlling the stock market, which brings us to motive number one for the Federal Reserve, which is control of the stock market. Now, I'm going to become my own critic at this point, and all right, Mr. Perloff, I've heard enough here. You're trying to tell these kids and these parents here that the Federal Reserve is a conspiracy. What a bunch of hooey. Come on, folks, this guy Perloff, he's trying to sell you on the idea that he's a serious historian. Let me tell you, he is not. You know what he is? I'll tell you what he is. Conspiracy theory nut. And I'm going to prove it to you because unknown to Mr. Perloff, I have had a private investigator follow him around recently and photographing him. And I'm going to prove to you he has the top 10 traits, characteristics of a conspiracy theory nut. Number one, his eyes are crossed. See that? They never even focus. Number two, he foams at the mouth. Look at him ranting and raving about his political ideas. Number three, he's paranoid about the American government. You can't just see him saying they're out to get me. What did I tell you? I.e., the government is out to get me. Number four, he's a member of a militia group. Probably advocates violence. Number five, he's got conspiracy on the brain. You know, that's all he thinks about all day is conspiracy. You know what? If his Aunt Tilly fell down the stairs, he'd say, well, David Rockefeller must have pushed it down. Number six, not very bright, you know. But if you double the guy's IQ, you still get a two-digit number. Number seven, I think this is particularly sad, but the poor guy really believes that Elvis Presley is still alive, living on a UFO. In fact, if you listen carefully, you can hear Elvis in Mr. Perloff's brain. All right, number eight, like all these conspiracy weirdos, he comes from the state of Idaho. You know, he probably lives up there in a shack with a sawed-off shotgun, a pickup truck, and a one-eyed hound dog. Number nine, he's a member of the Birch Society. And like all Birchers, every night he looks under his bed to make sure there's no sneaking, dirty communists. All right, so we got one big deal. You know, the guy's been looking there every night for the last 30 years. Law of averages, you're going to find one soon. And number 10, the last reason why you can't believe Mr. Perloff, they're coming to take him away. Literally. There you go. Well, I think that demolishes Mr. Perloff's argument successfully. Can we recover from that? Well, if you really think they're only conspiracy nuts to believe this stuff. I've written a couple articles recently in the New American on the Lindberghs. A lot of people know that Charles Lindbergh, the aviator, was the first man to fly the Atlantic, became the most admired man in the world. A lot of people don't know his father, Charles Lindbergh Sr., was a member of Congress, and he led the fight against the Federal Reserve Act. He saw right through it, and here's what he said on the floor of the U.S. House. This act, the Federal Reserve Act, establishes the most gigantic trust on earth. When the President signs this act, the invisible government, by the money power, proven to exist by the money trust investigation, will be legalized. What does he mean by the money power? He's talking about the alliance between Warburg, Rothschild, Morgan, and Rockefeller. The money power overawes the legislative and executive forces of the nation. I've seen these forces exerted during the different stages of this bill. From now on, depressions will be scientifically created. The new law will create inflation whenever the trust wants inflation. See if he's right or not. Check it out. No inflation before the Federal Reserve, skyrocketing inflation afterwards. Continuing with his quote, if the trust can get a period of inflation, they figure they can unload stocks on the people at high prices during the excitement, and then bring on a panic and buy them back at low prices. The people may not know it immediately, but the day of reckoning is only a few years removed. Once again, words of prophecy. That day of reckoning was a stock market crash of 1929. Millions of small investors wiped out, but not these guys. Paul Warburg, John D. Rockefeller, the younger J.P. Morgan's taken over his father, Bernard Baruch, who also operated within this group, and Joseph P. Kennedy, who operated on its outskirts. They were all out of the stock market in 1929, the little guys that got hit. Now, was that because they had wisdom? No. When you're running the Federal Reserve, you know the interest rates are going to shoot up in advance. You know it'll be out. You know the mechanisms like what they call short selling, which are a little too complicated to explain here. I'll skip this long quote. Curtis Dahl was Franklin D. Roosevelt's son-in-law, and he was on Wall Street on the day of the crash, working for Lehman Brothers, and he said of the crash, it was a calculated shearing of the public by the world money powers. But it wasn't just the stock market that were after with the Federal Reserve. Motive number 2 was creation of money from nothing. They wanted a counterfeiting machine. The best book that explains this is called The Creature from Jekyll Island. We have a very expensive government. Under Obama, our national deficit each year is over $1 trillion. That's not our budget. We spend $1 trillion more than we take in. That means every day of the year the government is spending $3 billion more than it takes in. Now how does our government take in money? Through income tax, right? By selling bonds, but bonds are a lousy way to fund the government. It's just a loan that you have to repay later with interest. But even with all the money it gets from income tax and bonds, the government still doesn't have enough money on hand. So how do they do that? How do they spend $3 billion more each day than they take in? Where do they get the money to pay government employees, defense contractors, Medicare recipients? Well, Jim Griffin in his book explains how it's done. Now, let's say that this week the federal government is short $1 billion to pay the salaries of the federal employees. What do? They send an agent of the U.S. Treasury over to the Federal Reserve Building, which is the building on the right, and a banker there literally writes out a check for $1 billion to the U.S. Treasury. Here's what you need to know. That's not based on any assets the Federal Reserve holds. It's what they call fiat money. It's money created absolutely for nothing, just like counterfeit cash. Now, if I did that or your parents did that, we wrote a check, we had no assets to back it up, they throw us in jail right away. Federal Reserve can do that, and it's legal. Now, why do they want to do that? Well, now it's like a counterfeiting machine. They want to fight a war. You fight the war with, Am I too loud?
No, break. Kids will be taking a break.
Should I take the break now? I'll be done with this in about 5 minutes or so.
Okay.
Maybe we better take the break. All right, why don't we go ahead and take the break? It's not my usual break point, but yeah, we'll take it now.